Before the war, the Bournemouth-Christchurch area in Hampshire had several affluent residents interested in aviation, and in 1932 this led to meadows between River Mud and the A35, about half a mile to the east of Christchurch, being developed for both private and commercial flying. The site, covering some 80 acres, had a good turf surface, but a drawback was its proximity to the sea with the liability of sudden sea fogs. Christchurch Aerodrome was renamed RAF Christchurch upon military commandeering in 1939. It was a small, grass runway airfield that became a critical center for radar research and aircraft production during the early stages of World War II rather than as a primary operational fighter or bomber station. With the outbreak of war, flying ceased until a variety of aircraft moved in to support the experiments of the telecommunications research establishment at Gosport. Plans were also afoot to establish an aircraft production facility on the western edge of the airfield, beside the A35, and this site was turned over to Airspeed Limited, who later built 550 Oxford trainers there. After the fall of France, which made Christchurch a vulnerable coastal location liable to enemy attack, the factory was well camouflaged. However, a full-scale raid on the aerodrome was never mounted by the Luftwaffe, and only the odd hit-and-run bombing from a lone aircraft in poor weather was experienced. Production of Airspeed Horsa gliders for use by airborne forces commenced in the winter of 1941-42, and the factory also did some aircraft modification work, notably to Spitfires. In a 1943 Air Ministry review of suitable sites in the New Forest area for the United States Army Air Force to use as forward bases for tactical fighters during the planned cross-channel invasion, it was proposed that, as Christchurch was not fully utilized, it could be enlarged and used for this purpose. The existing landing ground was too small to accommodate runways of the required length, but by piping the river mud fields lying southeast of the original airfield could be taken in to allow the laying of a 4,800-foot strip. Work started in October 1943 with the RAF's No. 5005 Airfield Construction Squadron doing the preliminary excavation and leveling. The U.S. 833rd Engineer Aviation Battalion laid a BRC fabric-supported runway, running between the A337 and the Mudeford Village Road. This landing strip was opened for restricted flying on January 18, 1944. At a later date, U.S. engineers substituted PSP for the last 600 feet of BRC at the northeastern end. There was insufficient room for a second runway, but a 2,700-foot landing strip running northwest to southeast was available on the south side of the airfield. A perimeter road, part BRC and part Sommerfeld track, was provided with dispersals for 80 aircraft, several taking up an area of the original airfield. Hangars were already in existence and consisted of 1 Bellman, 1 Bessonneau, and 3 extra over blisters. As there was only accommodation for some 250 personnel on the station, Summerford Grange to the north and the Beret Homage Estate to the east were taken over and their grounds used as campsites for the erection of around 300 tents. This was to be the principal accommodation for the men of the 405th Fighter Group who arrived on March 6, although a small advanced party had come in a week earlier. The component flying units of the group were the 509th, 510th and 511th Fighter Squadrons, which carried the codes G9, 2Z and K4, respectively, on their 75 P-47 Thunderbolts. On March 25, the group was visited by General Louis Brereton, and some reservations were expressed about the condition of the airfield and the tented accommodation. At this time, the group headquarters was making use of Beret Homage Mansion itself. The first mission was flown on April 11 when all 3 squadrons were involved in a fighter sweep over France. Thereafter the group was progressively involved in fighter bombing missions attacking bridges, railways and airfields. On D-Day, it was tasked with patrolling in the vicinity of Brest. In later weeks, armed reconnaissance in support of the armies brought an increasing rate of loss as the enemy's defenses, mostly light flak and small arms fire, had regularly to be faced in ground attack. During the 405th's operations from Christchurch, 21 of its P-47 failed to return from missions. There was little opportunity to engage the enemy, and the only air victory credited occurred during a dogfight on June 22, the same day that the first 405th personnel were transferred to the A8 Picoville strip in Normandy. For the next 3 weeks, both bases were used, the main movement of aircraft being on July 10 with the rear party moving out of Christchurch on the 18th. On their departure for France, the CO of the 405th Fighter Group presented a Stars and Stripes to Christchurch Priory to be hung there in perpetuity. There was no general reinstatement of areas used for aircraft standings until the summer of 1945. Thereafter, although there was a service presence on the airfield until January 1946, Christchurch was considered a Ministry of Aircraft Production airfield, Airspeed having developed their installation, bringing in work from other premises in Portsmouth. After the war, Airspeed designed and built a medium-sized prototype airliner, named the Ambassador, which first flew on July 10, 1947. The company had military contracts for development of the Vampire Trainer and Sea Vixen fleet fighter, necessitating the construction of a concrete runway roughly along the line of the old BRC strip. De Havilland eventually took over Airspeed, but a reduction in military contracts eventually led to the closure of the Christchurch plant in 1962, although the factory buildings still remain in commercial use. The airfield's proximity to the town led to both housing and industrial development. Barrett's, the house building company, acquired most of the land in the late 1970s, and during the following decade, all but a few acres were built on, with estate roads being given aircraft names.